Hi, this is Bastiaan, and this is the annotation of the game you just saw against an engine called Knightx192. So I stumbled upon this engine in my engine collection, and a quick search on Google showed it to be between 2000 and 2500 elo of strength. But when I started playing against it, I was pleasantly surprised by how powerful it was, and I've had it play 3 matches against Crafty, which is rated around 2700 plus elo on some boards, and Knightx won all 3 of them. And I had it play against Gosu, which is a 2500 elo Polish engine, and again it won without many difficulties. It's only when facing opponents like Chess Master 10th edition and Prodeo that it started losing, so I would estimate it well above 2500 elos. So here's how I killed it. I was playing black using the Caro Kann. So the game started with e4 and I play c6 Caro Kann. And white plays c4, which is the anti-Caro Kann variation. And this prevents, or discourages at least, a d5 break in the center with 2 pawns covering that square. So instead I play e5 to get center control, not challenging the anti-Caro Kann formation. White plays knight to f3, immediately attacking my e5 pawn, and I play d6. So this is a bit of a awkward position for black, but it's not bad. But I don't have the proper center control with pawns on the 5th rank, and the c6 pawn annoyingly prevents development of my knight on its natural square on c6. But it's not bad for black. This is all booked, by the way. White continues with knight to c3. I play bishop to g4, pinning the knight. Bishop to e2. Now, white is threatening a discovered attack in some cases, so I develop my knight to f6 to protect the bishop. White plays d4, looking for a break in the center. Knight b to d7, covering the threatened e5 pawn. White castles. I want to castle as well, and I want to castle queenside, so this queen needs to move. There are 4 available positions for the queen to move to. And I play queen to b6, which activates the queen on the diagonal. Also threatens b2 in some cases, but more importantly prevents the annoying, or discourages the annoying queen to b3. So pawn takes pawn, pawn recaptures. Bishop to d2, and now it's probably a mistake for black to take the pawn, because after rook to b1 we can see that my b7 pawn is unprotected, which in turn makes castling queenside a bad idea. Black should only capture the pawn after he has castled, so the king is protecting the b7 pawn. I play h6, not castling yet, simply because this allows white to jump with his knight to g5 and attack the pawn on f7. So I want to counter that threat first before castling. Black plays knight to a4, attacking the queen. So this makes black lose a tempo, because the queen has to move twice and retreat the queen to c7. But we can see that white will have to move his knight again, because it's in a bad position and is left outside of the game. White plays h3. So I retreat the bishop. Now, if I have to, I can play bishop to g6 and even fall back to h7. But on g6, I'm getting a nice attack on the pawn on e4. So, surely white won't play g4, compromising his own king, and actually forcing me into an attacking position with my own bishop. So, white plays knight to h4 instead, attacking my bishop, instead of forcing me to retreat any further. So I exchange, bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop. Finally I can castle. So I castle queenside. White activates the rook, rook a to d1, rook to the open file. And I play knight to c5. This attacks the knight on a4. And if white recaptures, I get free development of my bishop to c5. However, we can see that white is eyeing the outpost on f5. And if I develop the bishop, g7 will become under attack, and this is exactly what will happen in the game. So knight takes knight, bishop recaptures, so the bishop is in a nice attacking position. But white indeed plays knight to f5, attacking the pawn on g7. Now, I could play pawn to g5 to prevent the pawn from being captured. This will make it impossible for me to get rid of this knight outpost. I don't even have a white square bishop left. So after some thinking, I play g6 instead, chasing away the knight. Now this leaves h6 hanging because there are two pieces attacking it. But if white doesn't retreat and captures with the knight, of course, because it's being attacked, it gives white some tactical possibilities. So knight takes pawn and I'm down a pawn. And now the problem that white is facing is the exchange sacrifice. Rook takes bishop on d2. Now without the bishop, the knight is under attack. And black is going to lose two minor pieces for one rook, if he's not careful. So queen takes, protecting the knight. But in doing so, there's no longer any protection on the pawn on e4. So knight takes pawn, recapturing the pawn and threatening the queen. Queen moves to c1, still covering the knight on c6. So how do we get compensation? Well, moving the knight is not only good for black because it wins back the pawn or gains tempo or moves the knight in attacking position. It also opens up the f-file, so now I can move the f-pawn and f5 is possible, and finally we can see that the knight on h6 has become trapped because it no longer has any escape squares. Keep in mind that say g4 to eventually protect the pawn is not possible. So let's take a look at the normal continuation first. If white doesn't do anything about it, if we say plays pawn to a3, a random move, I can play queen to g6 and black will lose his minor piece. So that's the idea. If he tries g4, I can play queen to e7 instead, and we can see that white's king side has become too weak. And I'm threatening queen to h4, which will attack the pawn and attack the knight. So if in this position, let's say king to g2 to protect the pawn, we can see that queen h4 is strong, attacking the knight. And if g5 to protect the knight, knight takes pawn, threatening queen takes pawn check. So if rook to d2, for instance, queen takes pawn and mate. If instead rook takes knight, offering up the exchange, we can get queen takes check, which is also horrible for white. So black can't protect the knight without compromising his king's safety. If white tries something else instead of king to g2, let's say g5 to protect the knight immediately and blocking the diagonal for the queen, then simply knight takes, blocking the diagonal and attacking the knight. So if h4 to counterattack on the knight, knight h3 check, king g2, and queen takes, and white is as good as lost, losing the knight, and white has a strong kingside attack. Now, if pawn takes pawn is played instead, I can play queen to h4 once again. And if say pawn takes pawn, bishop takes check. Now if rook takes, queen takes check, king h1, knight g3 mate. And if king h1 immediately, of course queen takes pawn, check, and mate. So normal move doesn't work. G4 doesn't seem to work. If rook d to e1, for instance, is played, keep in mind that black can always try knight to g3, attacking the knight. Of course, the knight attacking the rook, and the knight cannot be recaptured because of the pin. Looks like black is going to be up a pawn in this variation. After the forced exchange. None of that was played. Black immediately recaptures the pawn on f5, grabbing a pawn back for the lost knight. I recapture. Black plays queen to c2, giving extra protection on the pawn on f2. Also attacking the knight in some cases. Queen to g7. Now I'm threatening rook takes pawn because there's a pin on the king. So king moves to h1 to get out of the pin. Now rook to g8, which is threatening mate. And black moves the pawn to g4. So we're cracking up white's defense. Queen to h7, again attacking the weak pawn on h3. King to g2 to protect. Queen to h4, which limits white's movement and attacks all pawns and brings the queen in to a dominating position. Of course, white's pawn shield is going to fall quickly. White tries some counterplay with b4, counterattacking the bishop, which is of course ignored because we are on a king hunt. Pawn takes pawn, threatening queen takes pawn. So if say white takes the bishop now. Queen takes check, king g1, g3, threatening mate. And if pawn takes pawn, rook takes check, queen blocks, rook recaptures his mate. So, of course, white doesn't dream about recapturing the bishop. He needs to bring pieces into the defense immediately. So queen to d3. This prevents queen takes pawn check, but it does allow a discovered check with pawn takes pawn, double check. So the king needs to move and moves to h1. Bishop takes pawn. Now the bishop is overprotected on f2 by the knight and the queen. This is a forced mate already. So white tries c5, and now h2. And at this point the engine resigns. Let's say if a random move is played, say h3, then the mating pattern is rook to g1 check, rook recaptures forced, pawn takes rook, promotion, double check and mate. So that's the main threat for white. Now, if white doesn't play a random move, let's say he takes out the bishop, then it's knight takes, triple fork, check and mate, which is losing for white, of course. Alternatively, if queen to g3, a desperation move, we can play knight takes, check and fork, king to g2, knight retreats, check, and white has a choice. Either he can fall back on h1, allowing for the same mating pattern, rook g1 check, recaptures, queen promotion, double checkmate. Or instead he can flee to f3, but this only leads to queen to g4 mate. So we can see that white black resigns after the h2 pawn move, because he has to start sacrificing pieces or simply accept a mate in 2 moves. So that was my game against the Knightx192 engine. A pleasantly strong engine and recommended for strong chess players. Thanks for watching and have a great evening.